that problem, but you know it's a problem. And so I'm kind of if I see a problem, I like kind of overreact, and I have been known to rip gaming computers out of the wall mid-game. I have discontinued cable the day after Super Bowl because the kids didn't finish their homework. I've done all sorts of things that probably were not the best judgment, but I knew there was a problem and I couldn't figure it out. So years of going to, church groups, organizational classes, reading mountains of books, it led me to realize, okay, we have a problem with screen time. So before we start this presentation, I do have to start with a disclaimer. I just realized I'm looking at my screen and not this screen, so let me get this started. Turn it on. So I'm not very tech savvy. I just know that I don't like tech, and it doesn't like me, and now I'm in a battle with it. So the title of my talk is Managing the Digital Vortex and Dealing with Digital Media in the Home. And we have a disclaimer, because Dr. Doan is in the Navy, this presentation and our book is in no way the endorsement or opinions or protocol of the U.S. Navy or military or any federal, state, or private groups he's employed by. This is based on science and our personal experience. Okay. So Dr. Doan, I have a few books available if you don't want to look them up and buy them through Amazon. One, the two books that really got our family to a solution was Dr. Doan's Personal Testimony, Hooked on Games. This is a great book for you to give to your husbands, because if your husbands are like my husband, they want to see data, statistics. What's the problem? This kid's behaving. I can enjoy my football game, give him the screen. Well, this talks about the neuroscience, and it talks about why screen time is so powerful, and why boys are more susceptible to addiction to screen time than girls. And it really got my husband and I on the same page, and we were, well, close to the same page. But we don't argue quite as much because we acknowledge it's a real thing that screen time does affect you neurologically. The second book is written by Victoria Dunkley. She's a neuropsychiatrist, and it's called Reset Your Child's Brain. So all of our senses activate neurochemistry and hormones that create behavioral changes. And a lot of her medical practice were moms coming or dads with children who had extreme behavioral problems and were on really strong psychotic drugs or antipsychotic drugs. And in her practice, she noticed very quickly that the kids were watching a lot of screen time, whether that be TV, video games. Back when she first started, there weren't virtual reality games like there are now, but now it's virtual reality games. And so she has spent her life studying it, and her whole practice is weaning children off screen time. In fact, she recommends a 28-day fast from all screen time to see if your child's behavior changes. And that's the amount of time your brain really needs to reset its neurochemistry, its response time, and hormones. So that's this book. And then when I met Dr. Doan and his wife, Julie, we got together, and I thought, I've been very blessed, and my husband has been very generous with me. We've spent years and thousands of dollars on specialists and family counselors and organizational coaches. Not every mom can do that, nor do they have 7 years to do that when their kids are young. So we got together and decided to write this workbook. It's a simple workbook that anybody can understand the neuroscience, and we correlate biblical teaching with neuroscience. And a lot of the reason we did that is Because a lot of times we look at Bible principles and we look at it like a character flaw. Well, a lot of times we need to look at the Bible like a working manual, an operational manual of this machine. Because God created us, so he kind of knows what inputs to give it and what not. And unfortunately, it didn't come with a computer tech manual because they weren't existing back then. So that's our workbook, and it's going to be put in use at Palomar Christian Conference Center this summer. We're going to start a Unplug Camp program for 4 weeks, and you can learn more about that on our Real Battle website. Okay, so now I have to turn this on so I can see what I'm showing you. So while I'm setting this part up, on your table, there are 3 flyers. This, in case we don't get to all of the things I want to talk to you about, because time flies when I'm up here, this is our Real Battle Ministry handout. It goes through statistics, effects on your child, a few guidelines on what's safe and what isn't. And just to let you know, okay, so you have that to look at and take home. You have a note paper that has about 5 items for you to Google. It takes about probably 30 minutes to get through all 5 items in total, and these are all leading experts on technology and the different ways it affects your child's brain, from behavioral, the risks you're exposing your children to, and what different tech experts feel about giving their son an iPad or their children iPads and technology. Okay, so we're going to start with this video, Neurons to Networks. I hope you enjoy it. Or networks. So the volume's not working. Here we go.
I mean, we know that the brain changes throughout life based on experiences. In fact, watching this movie is reshaping connections in your brain right now. But since we humans are the ones creating and using this technology, maybe a better question to ask is, how are we shaping our brains? There's so much about the brain that we don't know. But there are some things we do know. You see, not long after we humans began thinking, we began thinking about ways to understand our own brains. One strategy thinkers have used throughout history is to compare the brain to the newest technology of their day. The brain is a clock, a switchboard, a steam engine, a machine, a computer. And we wondered, how can today's technology help us understand the brain in a new way? And it was very clear. The internet, the most advanced technological system in the world, is such a strong framework to help understand the human brain, the most advanced biological system in the world. But then we thought about it a bit more. And since the internet is in such a young developmental stage, rapidly growing, constantly changing, forming billions of new connections all over the world, then maybe a stronger framework would be to compare it to a child's brain, which is in a similar stage of development, rapidly growing, constantly changing, and making billions upon billions of connections between different parts of the brain. So here's the question. If we say that the internet is in a similar developmental stage as a child's brain, then what can we learn by comparing them? Let's start with size. Obviously, the internet seems like a larger entity than a child's brain. But what does that mean in terms of our analogy? Which of these networks is more complex? We could say a synapse in the brain, the connection point between 2 neurons, is like a hyperlink, the connection point between 2 web pages. So are there more connections in a child's brain or on the internet? Well, the internet has over 100 trillion links. And an adult's brain has 300 trillion links. But get this, A child's brain has a quadrillion connections, 10 times the number of connections of the entire internet. A child's brain has more connections than the entire internet. Yes, it blew our minds too. How is that even possible? Let's break it down. As we said, a baby is born with 100 billion neurons. But those quadrillion connections, they're not there yet. Those connections form at a very rapid speed during the first 5 years of life, at 700 to 1,000 new synapses per second. Those connections are created through every interaction a child has and are important because they form the architecture of the brain. So every time you talk to and engage with a child, you are literally growing a brain, connecting the different parts of the brain, which allows for new ideas, insights, and creative thinking. So each moment of eye contact, each new word exchanged, each time you make a child laugh, you are strengthening these connections. During these early years, a child's brain makes as many connections as possible. And then it begins pruning the ones that aren't used and strengthening the ones that are. A dynamic process that continues throughout life. But since a child's brain is activated by everything it encounters, it can also be overwhelmed, which causes stress. When the brain experiences stress, the body's alarm system is activated. If the stress is relieved quickly, the system easily returns to normal. And while learning to deal with stress is an important part of development, severe situations such as ongoing abuse or neglect, where there is no caring adult to relieve the stress, leaves the body's alarm system activated, which can have serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Toxic stress can lead to a body system set permanently on high alert. It causes the synapses we use for learning and self-control to be pruned, while connections for fear and rash behavior get stronger. While the brain can change throughout the rest of life, these early years are fundamental in building a strong foundation for curiosity, creativity, and adaptability. And while we don't know all the ways technology is reshaping our brains yet, we do know that every time we plug in, every person we follow, email, or link to, we know it's affecting us. So we need to be mindful of what we let into our brains, always. Which sometimes means knowing when to disconnect. Just as it's not good for a child's brain to be constantly over or understimulated, it's not good for an adult's brain either. For both the internet and a child's brain, the connections we pay most attention to will be strengthened, while the ones we use less will be pruned. So how do we nurture both of these growing interconnected networks to set a course for a better future? By paying attention to what we are paying attention to. Attention is the mind's most valuable resource. Every interaction counts. We all have the opportunity to shape the future of the world, and our future starts here.
I hope that video was enjoyable for you. Can you guys hear me without me holding the microphone? Is that okay? Oh, you are recording? Oh, okay, great. Okay, is that better? Okay, so I skipped over with this remote. The 4 facts that really changed my life and watching this video is that brains prune themselves. I'd never heard of that concept. I have my own pharmacy in my brain and body, and addiction is not a character flaw. And smartphones and iPads are designed deliberately to be addicting. And so I will close with this slide also, but I just want those thoughts to kind of be in your mind, that smartphones and iPads aren't designed to make our lives better. They're designed to captivate you and analyze your thoughts so that they can sell you advertising and make money. I mean, that's the bottom line. So we really need to be wise about how we use it. And so that brings us to a biblical principle in 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. So we at Real Battle really are not anti-tech. As you can see, we use a lot of tech. It's just the key is using tech and not letting tech use you or create problems in your life. And I just want to say that I really did make about every mistake you can make as a mom. So one of the main things is I exposed my children to tech at too young of an age. And this is, mind you, in 2010, or when my children were your children's age, this stuff didn't even exist, thank God, because my kids never would have had a human interaction. They would have been in front of a TV their whole life because it made my life easier. But so on your flyer, if you'll notice, one of the guidelines is no media before the age of 2. That's based on neuroscientists' knowledge of the human brain. They don't want their children to have any screen time before the age of 2, and it's the way it's designed. And then no smartphones under the age of 14. I know this is daunting trivia and seems impossible, but if you can abide by those guidelines and even get close to them, your child's life skills will be so much improved for a better future so that they can achieve their potential and not limit their brain development. So let's look at some motivating trivia that when your kid is screaming for the iPad or telling you that Susie has a smartphone or arguing about having to get off the computer, these trivia facts really helped me. Video game addiction has now been declared a mental disorder by the World Health Organization. So you can actually cause mental illness in your children by letting them play on those games too long. And the next item is that China has over 200 government-sponsored tech addiction rehab centers and has declared the biggest threat to the survival of their country is tech addiction. In our country, we have no sponsored or government hospitals or rehab centers that help children or adults get off of tech and rehab. There are 3 private ones in the country, and they recommend usually about a 3-month stay to reset your behavior if you're truly at a dysfunctional level of addiction to tech, and that's about $35,000 for a 4-week stay times 3. Well, who can afford that? Not very many people. And then the last thing, Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, when asked at the release of iPads, I bet your kids really love their iPad, he said, I don't allow my kids to have iPads or smartphones. So let's think about that. The founder and designer of this technology won't let his own children have them. And it has to do with the way our brain learns and the reward pathway. Everything we do gets a little reward or doesn't get a reward. So things that we enjoy stimulate dopamine. So the reward pathway consists of the VTA, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex. When we have an experience and it's pleasurable, the VTA sends dopamine to your nucleus accumbens and your prefrontal cortex, and then those organs train your muscles and your motor skills and your planning abilities to create a memory, and then you keep planning on redoing that because you know you're going to get that dopamine fix. At least your brain does. And that's the way it goes, and that's the way these phones are designed. So let's watch the reward pathway video, and hopefully it will start.
The reward pathways in our brains motivate our behaviors. We tend to seek things that are pleasurable, enjoyable, fun, and self-benefiting. Without brain reward pathways, we would not receive the arousal and hormones necessary for us to seek food, shelter, and life. Problems develop when we abuse the reward pathways to escape and to adopt addictive behaviors. We also face problems when we seek rewards associated with evil and sin. Seeking good behaviors requires self-discipline, sacrifice, and patience. As we practice self-discipline, sacrifice, and patience, our brains strengthen the memories and neuronal pathways associated with these desired behaviors. Therefore, with thoughts, we can physically change our brains and our behaviors. In the digital age, we are surrounded by the potential for constant rewards, such as Facebook likes or scoring points in our favorite games. Stimulating the hormones that make us feel good associated with excessive use of digital media can lead to problems when we sacrifice time with people for sleep and for important tasks.
Okay, so, nope, wrong one. Okay, so it really boils down to we do things that feel good and we do things that feel bad. This stimulates the brain to either generate dopamine or activate your hormonal pathways to action and create neuronal connections. And the more you do those experiences, those neuronal connections are stronger, and so they become like a habit, a reflex. So it's brain development that neuroscientists and experts in that field are developing the technology and programs and algorithms in our phones and games and iPads to become more addictive. And on your list of things to look up, there's a man by the name of Tristan Harris, and he is an expert in the field of creating addiction to your phones. And he woke up one day and realized, what am I doing? And he started a charitable or 501c3 called Time Well Spent. And so I hope that you spend the time to look that up. And I'm going to play another video for you to explain brain development.
The human brain matures from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. During maturation, neuronal connections that are used often are strengthened. Hence, neurons that fire together wire together. Connections that are not used often are removed or pruned away. Therefore, if you don't use your brain, you will lose it. The front of the brain consists of areas that control higher executive functions. The front of the brain begins the pruning process during the early teenage years with complete maturation by around age 25. In his book Outliers, The Story of Success, Gladwell stated that it takes 10,000 hours to develop expertise. Because of brain pruning, it is best to devote 10,000 hours into behaviors we desire to have as adults when our brains are young and easily programmed. What we see, hear, feel, and think seriously affect our brains when it is not fully mature. Young brains are particularly vulnerable to risky and addictive behaviors. Because the front of the brain does not fully mature until age 25, we do not have the reasoning abilities to make wise decisions. Therefore, we make more mistakes and more decisions in our youth. If we apply this knowledge to create guidelines for technology usage at each age, we can better ensure that the vulnerable mind of a child does not get damaged by overusing digital media technology.
Okay. So there's three major prunings that occur, even though it is continual, but the major periods for brain pruning is 2 years old, puberty, and age 25. And you can look at this because when the baby's born, every baby is born into a environment that it can adapt to any environment. So the pruning makes it efficient that it won't go down every neuronal pathway before it makes a decision or acts on it. Puberty, you prune there because obviously after you have children, you're going to need to start developing your executive functions. Your actual environment's probably not going to change that much. And so your basic skill sets are pretty much formed. And then 25, your brain does another final pruning. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean you're never going to be able to learn something after the age of 25? No, it just becomes more difficult because your brain has less plasticity after 25. And plasticity is the ability to make new neuronal connections in your brain. Well, neuroscientists know this. So they like to create things that captivate our brain, mesmerize us, and they utilize every stimulus to start creating those feel-good hormones and neurotransmitters. So what are our executive functions? I know as parents, we think that when the child says no or they find things, that they're doing things that are deliberate, that they know what they're doing. You know, they're trying to make me crazy. They really aren't. You don't develop skills like that until after puberty and before before your brain prunes at 25. As much as, they seem demonic, that they're driving you crazy, they really are just cause and effect. That's the level of their brain at that point and what makes them feel good and happy. So, should we go back through? So the executive functions are impulse control, emotional control, flexible thinking, working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initiation, and organization. And we have an analogy that if we spend all our time gaming, oh, I thought that was my phone going off, sorry. It's like your hand. Let's give the skill sets achieved by gaming to your thumb, and the skill sets achieved by communication skills to your index finger, and relationships are your middle finger, empathy and self-control would be your ring finger, and athletic ability would be your pinky. If you're dedicating more time to developing these neuronal connections by the age of pruning at puberty, what happens? Your fingers fold in. That would be like pruning, and you're all thumbs in your thinking. You're quick to respond, to overreact, and you lack all your executive functions, or they're not as strong, so they don't naturally come to you. And the other way to think about it at 25, have you ever noticed you can't rent a car until you're 25 and your insurance rates go down at 25? Neuroscientists know this, and they're employed by all of these these companies that analyze risks, and when things go down, it's based on your brain, and all of your logic starts coming in by that age.
Things we look at affects our bodies through patterns of light photons
stimulate our brains.
hitting our photoreceptors in the retina of the eye to stimulate activation of neuronal pathways in the brain. Brain stimulation activate brain reward pathways and hormonal release. Depending on what we look at, brain and hormonal activation influence how we feel, such as anger, fear, sadness, empathy, joy, pleasure, lust, and other feelings. As we expose ourselves to excessive amounts of sensory stimuli, such as sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch, the brain and hormonal pathways develop tolerance. With excessive visual stimuli, we seek more arousing stimuli and more deviant stimuli when we develop tolerance. Hearing, smell, taste, and touch will send information to the brain and activate hormonal systems like the visual system. All digital activities such as video games, social media, watching videos, and using cell phones should not consume more than 1 to 2 hours daily. People who use more than 3 hours of digital media per day can develop emotional and behavioral problems. Sleep deprivation associated with excessive digital media is well known to lead to behavioral, emotional, and mental problems. With prolonged sleep deprivation and dysregulation of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal pathway, mental disorders like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and psychotic disorders may develop.
Okay. So our senses stimulate this powerful cocktail of hormones and neurotransmitters that actually are as potent as anesthesia. Where technology comes in, it hijacks real life because your brain does not determine a difference between if you're watching it on a screen and you're stimulating these senses, they're stimulating the parts of your brain that create your neurotransmitter dopamine and endorphins, and then it activates the HPA pathway, which stimulates your hormones, and then you're just jacked up. And so you're putting your kids on these, or people stay in front of these screens. It's like when you go to Disneyland and you have those virtual reality games and it feels like you're falling down the hill and all that sound gets you all stimulated like you're in the same, you're actually doing it yourself. Well, your brain doesn't determine that. So we're putting kids for hours in front of a screen, stimulating chemicals that are supposed to be able to motivate them to run from a bear or jump out of the way of a speeding train. You hear about people that have, let's say run from 9/11 and they get to safety and finally the doctor's like, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm okay." When they calm down and they realize, "Oh my God, my arm's broken." They didn't even feel it happen. That's how powerful our pharmacy in our brain is, and our eyes stimulate that. So if you're putting your kids' eyes in front of a screen and they're developing all these hormones while sitting still and not burning up that energy, you're creating a crazy person there. And it's not because they're crazy, it's because they are high on their own chemicals. And this is something that's really mind-blowing. So you have all these senses. Your eye stimulates 60% of your brain. That's more powerful than all your other senses combined. And screens do that. And that's, so your senses go in your brain and they stimulate your hormone production. And then the problem is when you overstimulate everything, it hijacks your whole body, and real life becomes boring. So because the screens are so much more entertaining and they stimulate more feel-good chemicals in your body than interacting in daily life. Life doesn't happen like it does in the screen. So this is an example where screen time or digital media and the hormone stimulation is being used for good. It's not all bad. They're now using virtual reality games to enable scar or burn victims to have their scars scrubbed off every day without needing the use of painkillers. That's how powerful it is. You can put a soldier on digital media for 30 minutes, and in 30 minutes you can scrub their skin off. Something to think about. They're using it for children now. Put a child on a video game for 20 minutes before a medical procedure. You don't need to expose them to all the pain pills or killers in order to get a dental procedure or whatnot, because some kids have side effects for those things, and you don't want them to experience pain. So let's see how babies react. This is a video of a baby and an iPhone.
Can I see this?
I almost start lactating 20 years after having kids, hearing that kid cry like this. But that's how powerful your hormones are. Okay? And we are, so let's look at how much time is harmful. What is screen time doing? Now, the experts in this field find that 0 to 1 hour of screen time is okay. That's kind of their recommended thing. Now, when my doctor told me that, or my children's doctor told me that at their annual checkups, I'm like, you don't stay home with your kids that much, do you? And it went in one ear and out the other. So I know a lot of people homeschool and the books and everything are on screens. And so between 1 and 3 hours, that's usually you won't occur damage. But unless your child has real sensitivity to screen and light. But over 3 hours, dysfunction starts to occur. And let's look at what the dysfunctions are for over 3 hours of screen time. The main thing is people become addicted to the dopamine they're stimulating from their screen time. Their sleep deprivation, gamer rage, depression, anxiety, antisocial behaviors, failure to achieve their potential. And then with adults, it's family abuse and extremely violent behaviors and self-harm. That occurs at all ages. So let's look at the addiction pathway.
Many people develop addictive behaviors because of poor stress management. The model for addictive behaviors starts with stress. With poor stress management, we crave rituals and behaviors to relieve stress. These behaviors may be overeating, drugs, alcohol, anger, arguing, excessive social media, escape with gaming marathons, and overuse of digital media. With overuse, we face the consequences of neglecting relationships, responsibilities, and God's plans for us. With consequences, we add to our stress, and the entire cycle repeats itself. And
that's the key. It's a series of cyclical behaviors, and that creates addiction. And it interferes with God's plans for us because we're spending so much time dealing with that addiction. So the addiction cycle is you get a stress trigger, you have a craving for whatever you're used to getting dopamine from, and then you partake in that activity, and then you feel guilty from it if you're overusing it, and then the whole thing cycles again. So this epiphany hit me one day when I started studying all this, that my son I could hear my son playing the game upstairs. And I had to drop my hot fudge sundae, turn the TV off, stumble over the mountain of laundry and chores I was supposed to be doing, run upstairs and yell at him for playing one video game and not doing his homework. So once I understood dopamine production, I realized I was a huge hypocrite. I was stimulating more dopamine than he was at that point and being a lot more unhealthy. And it's all because our bodies were designed to act this way. It's not a character flaw. Your kids aren't bad. You're not bad. We just need to learn healthy ways to motivate ourselves to good behavior. And technology has now changed the face of addiction. The average age of our kids now, thanks to pop-ups and access to the internet, is now 8 years old for pornography. They're getting exposed to pornography at 8 years old. And that's because they use pop-ups in the games that are marketed to children. So I want you this is my last video, and thanks for being patient, but this will give you insight into the face of addiction now.
I was just playing on this game site, and all of a sudden this pop-up comes in the corner. You go and you click on it, and it's this porn site, and I'm like, whoa, that was weird. So I click on the X and I keep playing my game. For the few seconds that I saw it, I couldn't get it out of my head. You almost feel like a little craving, but at first you think it's curiosity, not a craving. Sometimes it would just be want to see, click here. You know, you're like, well, what are you talking about? You click on it, and then there's just this whole screen full of it. The addiction really all started in 3rd grade when I was 9 years old.
You can't help but feel responsible for the fact that, you allowed this in the house. The internet is just sitting there ready.
His entire pornography addiction happened in the kitchen and living room of my home while the family was in the room.
a lot of the times you don't just pick one picture and then just stare at it. You just keep going and going and going, and all the pictures are always different. Type like 3 letters, and there you go, you've got it.
So, back to the 4 facts. Brains prune themselves. I have my own pharmacy built into my body. Addiction is not a character flaw. And smartphones and iPads are designed to be addicting. Was that child an evil child when he was watching a game and a thing came up and he wasn't controlling, he clicked on a letter, 4-letter word, and then the porn industry starts introducing them to videos? No, they know we're stimulated by these things. They know how our brain works. And I don't want to sound like a zealot who's anti-technology. I'm really learning a lot and trying to enjoy technology, but in moderation. So we realize that time is a precious gift. Children are gifted with a special talent waiting to be unleashed, and we need to unplug our kids so that they get back into interaction and so that real life seems real, and is stimulating again. And I think I'm out of time, but I hope you enjoyed. I could go on and on and on.